19-year-old Alisha Monroe vanished without a trace on her way to a music festival in Detroit. 2 years later, a girl named Nikki Torres escapes captivity and reveals a truth darker than anyone imagined. An underground gang of women, led by shadows, executing their own form of justice across the USA and UK. No mercy, no witnesses, and at the center of it all a name whispered like a ghost, Ivy. Alisha Monroe had always been the kind of girl who played it safe. 19 years old, top of her class at Wayne State University, she lived with her mother and little brother in a quiet suburb outside Detroit. She didn't go out much, didn't trust strangers easily, and never broke rules. But that night, June 18, 2016, something inside her wanted a little more. Maybe it was the summer heat, the energy of the city pulsing in the air, or the pull of her favorite band playing downtown. She told herself it was harmless. A concert, a few hours with friends, back before midnight. Her mother hugged her in the doorway. "Text me when you get there," she said, trying to hide the worry in her voice. Alisha smiled, lifted her phone, and promised, "I will. Love you." She meant it. She always did. She never made it to the arena. Alisha's car was found the next morning, parked neatly in a metered space on Woodward Avenue. Her purse was on the passenger seat. Her phone, locked and dead, lay in the cup holder. There was no blood, no broken glass, no sign of a struggle. Just absence, just silence. At first, police treated it like a runaway case. She was young, maybe stressed, maybe hiding something. But her mother knew better. Alisha didn't disappear without reason. She didn't vanish for fun. Something had happened. Something dark. 3 weeks later, another girl went missing. Same area, same age, same eerie stillness in her wake. Her name was Dana Price. She was last seen walking out of a cafe, smiling into her phone. Surveillance footage showed her turning down an alley to take a shortcut home, and then nothing, like she had evaporated. By the time the third girl vanished, the city began to whisper. Parents held their daughters closer. News outlets ran features on the downtown disappearances. Still, no one could explain how 3 young women, smart, careful, good girls, could be taken without a trace. Behind the headlines, in quiet homes and sleepless nights, fear bloomed like mold. Alisha's mother barely ate. She couldn't walk past her daughter's empty room without shaking. She checked Alisha's social media constantly, rereading old posts, listening to her voicemail just to hear her voice. She kept calling her number, hoping one day anyone might answer. The lead detective on the case, Marcus Eldridge, couldn't forget the look in Alisha's mother's eyes during their first meeting. It wasn't just grief, it was rage. A helpless, burning rage that someone out there knew what had happened and was watching everyone scramble in the dark. Eldridge had worked homicide for 12 years, but this was different. No motives, no bodies, just 3 missing girls and no clues. Late at night, he would sit alone at his desk and stare at their photos. Alisha, Dana, and Emily, smiling in selfies, frozen in better times. He wondered what they had in common. What had drawn them to the same place, the same fate? He began to believe it wasn't random at all, that someone was selecting them, preparing something. A pattern hidden in plain sight. But who? And why? What the police didn't see, what no one saw, was the van that followed Alisha that night. No license plate. Windows blacked out. It had parked across from her car, engine running, silent. Inside were 3 girls, no older than Alisha, but colder in their eyes. They had watched her walk away, laughing. They had waited until she was alone, then the door had opened. It was quick, clean, practiced. No screams, no witnesses. That was the rule. No mess, no trace. Alisha had known something was wrong the second the cold metal touched her neck, but her fear hadn't had time to grow. Only the confusion stayed in her eyes, wide and searching. As she was pulled into the dark, her phone buzzed once inside the car. Her mother's message, lighting up the screen. Did you get there safe? It would never be read. Rain fell lightly over East London, misting the cracked sidewalks and dimming the streetlights that flickered like nervous eyes. In the heart of the city's underbelly, detectives were piecing together a puzzle that made less sense the more they studied it. A pattern was forming, but not the kind that made things clearer. Instead, every new detail only pulled them deeper into something far more organized and far more disturbing than they were prepared for. Detective Inspector Evelyn Shaw stood at the edge of a crime scene in Hackney, her coat clinging damply to her shoulders. She looked at the faint pink spray paint still visible through the rain. 3 words on a living room wall, uneven but deliberate. Justice served. The message wasn't loud or angry. It was cold, final. A statement, not a threat. The victim, a 47-year-old man named Colin Barrett, had been found bound to a stair, face bruised, fingernails ripped, blood pooling slowly under his feet. No signs of forced entry, nothing stolen, but his criminal record told its own story. Multiple accusations of domestic abuse, all mysteriously dropped over the years. A man with power, privilege, and a past that had caught up with him. Evelyn rubbed her temples as she stared at the words again. Justice served. Who was serving it, and why now? A week later, another man, different background, same story, was found dead in Camden, under the same conditions. A pink signature again marked the wall like a silent stamp of completion. Then a third, in Bow. All the men had histories of abuse. All had walked free from the system. All had died silently, alone in their homes. The press called it a string of vigilante killings. The department feared something worse. A cult, perhaps, a terrorist cell. But Evelyn had begun to suspect something even stranger. Something personal. The method didn't feel like ideology. It felt like vengeance. Late one evening, she sat alone in her apartment, sifting through files. Faces of dead men stared back at her. Each of them looked smug in their mugshots, like they never believed their past could reach them. She thought of her sister, now living in a women's shelter across town, too afraid to return to the flat where her ex still lived freely, untouched by the courts. Evelyn understood rage. She just never imagined it could take this form. Then came the USB drive. It was mailed anonymously to Scotland Yard, slipped inside a plain brown envelope with no return address. At first glance, it seemed like a prank, until IT decrypted the files inside. There were photos. Not of the victims, not of their families, but of 3 missing girls from the US, each one catalogued, time-stamped and tagged with GPS data from Detroit. Evelyn's heart froze. It made no sense. Why would photos of American missing persons be connected to a string of British murders? The timeline didn't overlap. The victims had no links to the States. But then she saw it. Backgrounds in the photos that matched known addresses of the murder victims. Same furniture, same wallpaper. Somehow those girls had been in the homes before the murders. She stared at the images for hours, trying to make sense of them. The girls didn't look afraid. They looked present. Some were captured mid-action, one standing in a kitchen, another peering through a window. There was no fear in their faces, no visible restraint. Evelyn couldn't help but wonder, were they being held captive? Or had they become something else entirely? As the city slept, a quiet terror began to settle over her. If these girls were victims once, they weren't anymore. They had transformed into something sharper, something relentless. They weren't asking for help. They were delivering it in their own brutal way. Evelyn clicked through the last photo. A girl with braided hair and fierce eyes stood over a man's unconscious body, staring into the lens with calm defiance. Her expression said everything. She didn't want to be saved. She wasn't lost. She was exactly where she meant to be. And that realization chilled Evelyn to her core. The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital in Kansas City was quiet when the girl walked in barefoot, limping, her clothes torn, her hair a tangled mess of knots and dirt. At first the nurses thought she was homeless, maybe high, maybe delusional. But there was something raw in her silence, something ancient and broken behind her eyes that made everyone stop and stare. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just collapsed. They called her Jane Doe for the first few hours, until a fingerprint scan revealed her identity, Nikki Torres. Reported missing nearly 2 years earlier. Last seen leaving her high school in broad daylight, never arriving at home. Her case had long gone cold, her family shattered. The media cycle moved on, but now she was back. Alive. Barely. Nikki didn't speak for the first 48 hours. She flinched at loud sounds, stared too long at light fixtures, and refused to sleep with the door closed. Trauma specialists called it dissociation, classic signs of captivity. But this wasn't classic. Not even close. When she finally began to talk, it came out in pieces. At first, she told them she didn't remember. That was a lie. She remembered everything. She had been taken by a group of girls, not older than herself, who lured her in with soft smiles and false kindness. They wore charity t-shirts, handed out flyers and offered rides to vulnerable teens. Nikki had been walking home, upset after an argument with her mother, when they pulled up beside her. She hesitated, then got in. The ride was quiet. The air smelled like vanilla. One of the girls handed her a bottle of water. That was the last thing she remembered clearly. The next thing she knew, she was underground, literally. A concrete room with no windows. A mattress on the floor. A single light bulb that buzzed constantly overhead. She thought they would kill her. She begged them to, but they didn't. They fed her, bathed her, spoke to her, not with cruelty, but with eerie calm. They told her the world was broken, that justice was a myth, that they had seen it, lived it, suffered under it. And now they were rewriting the rule. At first, Nikki resisted, screamed, fought, cried until her throat bled. But no one came. No one ever came. Weeks turned into months. Time warped in that space. She began to lose track of who she was. They gave her books on psychology, history, radical feminism. They gave her a journal and told her to write everything she remembered about her life. Every man who had hurt her. Every adult who had failed her. Every moment she'd felt powerless. Then they showed her videos, not of violence, but of trials, news report cases where women were ignored, abused, erased. She watched hours of courtroom footage where guilty men walked free. They called it education, rebirth. Slowly, something shifted. Not sympathy, not acceptance, but numbness. She was told she had a choice: stay in the shadows forever, or become something more. A weapon, a message, a warning. They gave her a target, a man with a violent record, a known predator. They showed her how to fight him, how to get inside his house, how to make him disappear without a trace. It was her final test. Her baptism. They said she'd be reborn after it. Clean, empowered, free. But Nikki ran. She waited until the door was left unlocked, just for a second. She bolted barefoot into the freezing night, ran until her lungs burned, until her feet bled. She didn't know where she was, only that she had to keep moving. She found a bus station, slept in a bathroom, followed the signs to the nearest hospital. Even now, safe and warm, she didn't feel free. Her body had escaped, but parts of her mind were still back there, underground. The worst part wasn't the fear. It was the understanding. A tiny part of her, one she hated, agreed with them. They were building something, planning, and she had seen enough to know it wasn't over. Not even close. The warehouse in the Bronx didn't look like much from the outside, just another forgotten building tucked between junkyards and auto repair shops. But inside it was alive with secrets. Cold metal shelves lined the walls, stacked with burner phones, license plates, forged IDs, and a map that would become the center of one of the FBI's most classified manhunts. On that map, 5 U.S. cities were circled in red: New York, Chicago, Atlanta, Denver, and Seattle. It wasn't random. Every circle told a story. A man found dead, no suspects, no signs of entry, all with a quiet past of abuse and a very public escape from the law. Special Agent Darren Cole had seen a lot over the years: cartels, syndicates, international crime rings, but nothing about this case made sense. The targets were calculated, the murders methodical, yet no gang claimed responsibility, no message was sent, no trophies taken, just the same eerie pattern. Each time, victims with dark pasts, erased, quietly, efficiently, without fanfare. And then the haunting signature at one of the scenes: a rose. Project Nightshade was launched in secret. A task force was assembled under the radar, and Agent Cole was placed in charge. He had no time to think about why they'd chosen him. He only knew he hadn't slept in days, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw the expression on the face of the last victim: shock, confusion, and something else. Almost relief. When they traced the connection to the Bronx safe house, they thought they were ahead of the group for once. Surveillance drones picked up movement, 5 women coming and going at irregular hours, all young, dressed in plain clothes, almost invisible. They didn't match any known criminal profiles. They didn't talk to neighbors, didn't leave behind any trash, didn't even use electricity. It was as if they lived outside the grid but inside the city, like ghosts who knew how to hide in the noise. Cole ordered the raid at sunrise, hoping to catch them before they vanished again. SWAT stormed the building with precision. But the warehouse was already burning. The fire wasn't accidental, it had been planned, contained with accelerants. Files, equipment, everything gone. What remained was ash and a single photograph tacked to the wall. It showed 6 women sitting around a table, blurred faces, heads slightly tilted, as if daring the camera to look closer. On the back, handwritten in ink that hadn't yet dried: "We were never yours to find." Cole stared at the photo for hours. The expressions weren't mocking, they were calm, focused. Women who believed they were on a mission. Women who had already accepted that they were being hunted. But the part that chilled him most wasn't the warehouse, or the map, or even the fire. It was what they hadn't found. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, not a trace of human presence. Whoever these women were, they had practiced this, rehearsed, planned for the day they'd have to vanish again. Cole couldn't shake the feeling that he was chasing shadows, that every move they made had already been anticipated. His own agents, trained, lethal, strategic, felt like they were playing catch-up in a game where the rules were being rewritten by the very people they were trying to stop. He tried to shake the guilt. The idea that they were just a bunch of killers. But something about it all felt different. The precision, the targets, the quietness of it all. They weren't making a statement to the world. They were fixing something, erasing what they saw as stains. But justice wasn't theirs to deliver. That was what haunted him. Still, deep down, a voice he couldn't silence kept whispering: what if they're right? What if the system really did fail? What if this is the only justice some people will ever see? And that voice terrified him more than any gang ever could. The arrest came quietly, without drama. No chase, no resistance. Emily Voss stood outside the Manchester police station, dressed in her neatly pressed uniform, sipping a coffee when the internal affairs officers approached her. She didn't flinch. She didn't run. She simply set the cup down, raised her hands, and allowed the cuffs to slide over her wrists. Her face was expressionless, unreadable, almost serene, as though she had been waiting for this moment, expecting it, maybe even welcoming it. 24 years old, top of her class at the academy, with a spotless record and commendations for discipline and professionalism, Emily had been the last person anyone expected to betray the badge. And yet, the evidence was overwhelming. She had accessed files far above her clearance level. She had made late-night logins to protected databases. She had transferred case notes to encrypted USB drives. But what shook the department to its core was what she confessed during the first hour of interrogation. "I wasn't coerced," she said. "I believe in what they're doing." The room had fallen silent. Detectives exchanged uneasy glances, unsure if they were dealing with a criminal or something more dangerous. A true believer. Emily spoke in calm, measured words. No anger, no panic, just conviction. She explained that she had been recruited online, drawn in through anonymous forums that discussed failed justice systems, survivor stories, and buried cases. It started as curiosity, then sympathy, then certainty. She had watched videos, read leaked transcripts, heard the recordings of women crying in courtrooms where no one listened. They didn't come for her, she went to them. She called her handler Ivy. No last name, no location, just a voice, sharp, clear, and impossible to forget. Ivy never revealed her identity, but her instructions were always precise, and her motives crystal clear: expose corruption, gather information, erase the... It was more than ideology. It was execution. Emily admitted she never met Ivy in person, never knew her face. Their communication was digital, coded emails, interticked calls, voice-altered messages. But Ivy had guided her step by step. She had fed her targets. She had shaped her view of the world. At first, Emily had hesitated. She wasn't naive. She knew what betrayal meant. But the more she saw the reports ignored, the predators walking free, the victims crushed under systems designed to forget them, the more her doubt began to rot. She remembered her cousin's case, buried in red tape after a judge dismissed the charges due to lack of evidence. She remembered how helpless she had felt even in uniform. Joining them didn't feel like a fall from grace. It felt like justice. But there was a limit even she couldn't cross. She refused to kill. She had told Ivy that from the beginning, her role was to gather, to feed the machine, never to pull the trigger. Ivy had accepted that, or pretended to. Until the day she asked Emily to leak a witness's address, someone who had testified in a human trafficking case. Emily knew what that meant. She hesitated for the first time, and in that hesitation, her cover slipped. She didn't regret being caught. She said it almost with relief. But what haunted her wasn't the prison cell or the trial ahead. It was the fact that she didn't know how many more Emilys were out there. How many more quiet officers, students, nurses, tech workers, blending into cities across the world, answering only to Ivy. Before she was taken away, she said one last thing, almost like a whisper meant for someone else. This isn't the end. She's still out there. She's already picked the next cities. You won't stop her. We never And with that, Emily Voss disappeared behind a steel door, her calm footsteps echoing like the ticking of a clock. None of them could rewind. The video appeared without warning. No upload. No source. No traceable origin. It simply emerged on Prodent forums, encrypted chat rooms, and dark web portals, like a ghost whispering through the wires. Its title was plain: The Final Message. The thumbnail showed nothing. Just black. But the moment it began to play, investigators across 5 countries dropped everything they were doing. The screen stayed dark for the first few seconds. Then came the sound, soft, static, the kind that clings to old radios in empty rooms. Slowly, shadows began to form. A dim circle of masked women, all dressed in black, standing in complete stillness, faces hidden, hands folded, no movement, no posturing, just presence. There was no logo, no slogan. They weren't looking for attention. This wasn't propaganda. It was a statement. A voice broke the silence. Not sharp, not emotional, just steady. Female, altered digitally, but unmistakably human. We are not done. We are everywhere. We are the judgment they fear. The screen flickered. Brief flashes of grainy footage followed. City skylines, alleyways, abandoned homes. Each frame felt pulled from someone's memory. Then for a split second, came the image that would haunt agents and journalists alike: a girl, young, no older than 22, standing in front of a wall of newspaper clippings and red string. She looked into the camera with calm, icy focus. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. And beneath her photo, written in red marker, was a single word: Net. The FBI's cybersecurity team traced the video to a server farm in Nevada, a cold, dusty facility long thought abandoned. When agents arrived, the building was silent. The server racks had been fried with acid. Power cables were slashed, lights broken, but someone had left a message, spray-painted across the server room's main wall in that familiar pink: "You were too late." In the far corner, they found the wall of photos. Not photos of victims, but of known gang members, each marked with an X. Some of them were confirmed dead. Others had disappeared entirely. But the most unsettling part wasn't who was crossed out. It was who remained. At the center was the girl from the video. Her photo wasn't X'd, it was circled. Nobody recognized her. No matching records. No social media. No fingerprints. She was invisible, yet she stood at the heart of everything. And whoever she was, the message was clear. She wasn't just another member. She was the next leader, maybe already the current one. Agent Darren Cole, now worn and weary after years on the case, stared at her photo for hours. He felt something shift deep in his chest, like he was standing at the edge of something enormous and unknowable. He thought about the warehouse in the Bronx, the map, the bodies. He thought about Nikki Torres, about Emily Voss, about all the women who had vanished and returned transformed. He wondered what could make someone like her, so young, so composed, step into a world like this with such purpose. Was it trauma, revenge, or something colder? Something learned and honed and passed down like a torch in the dark. He tried to believe this was the end, that the group had run its course. But in his gut, he knew better. They didn't move like criminals. They moved like believers, disciples of a doctrine too deep to unravel. They didn't seek fame or wealth. They didn't need validation. They were building something that didn't need to be seen, only felt. And the worst part, people were starting to admire them, quietly, secretly, in whispers and locked conversations. Stories had begun to circulate, survivors protected, abusers vanished, communities cleaned up by unknown hands. Some were lies, some weren't. But all of them fed the myth, the movement. The system had created its own avenger, not one woman, but many. Trained, invisible, unafraid. And if this new face was truly the next in line, then the world hadn't seen the end. It had only witnessed the beginning.